Hi there, and welcome to the Grief and Rebirth podcast. I'm your host, author and trauma survivor Irene Weinberg, here to encourage you wherever you are in your healing journey. In each episode, I chat with incredible grief and trauma specialists, healers, mediums, and celebs, as well as remarkable people who have inspiring healing stories to share. If you're looking for a podcast that's both uplifting and inspiring, you've found it. Let us help you find your joy in life. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds each of you so very well. I'm speaking to you from my studio in West Orange, New Jersey. Delighted to have this opportunity to interview Michael Wall, who will be speaking to us from Los Angeles. To say that Michael is a very gifted and multifaceted man is an understatement. He is an award-winning filmmaker who has authored 15 nonfiction books on filmmaking and post-production technology, the founder of Bread Heals, a culinary curation club in Los Angeles, the principal baker of the delivery-only bakery called Burlesque Buns. He is perhaps most well known as one of the original designers of Apple's Emmy award-winning software Final Cut Pro. He taught film editing for 8 years at UCLA School of Film and TV, and all of this is just for starters. Now, Michael has added an introspective, honest, and darkly humorous memoir about grief, forgiveness, and the complexities of human relationships to his many credits. In Herschel's Wake is about Michael's charismatic and irresponsible father named Herschel, who was a twice divorced astrologer, a pharmacology professor, a failed novelist, an on-the-lam drug runner, a manual typewriter thief, an Aikido white belt, a possible communist, and a temporary resident of the little-known island of Statia. When Herschel died unexpectedly just before his 71st birthday, Michael had to travel 4,000 miles and overcome 4 decades of resentment to pick up his father's pieces. Along the way, he reconnected with his forgotten half-brother, reconciled with his overeducated, underachieving sister, and even reckoned with his ambivalence about religion. Because the tiny island of Statia had no modern funerary services available, the 3 estranged siblings were left to bury their enigmatic father by themselves and by hand. I'm looking forward to interviewing Michael about how this forced them to confront their complicated relationships, not only with their eccentric father, but also, and perhaps most importantly, with each other, the unique grieving process that comes with the death of an absent parental figure. One of Michael's darkly funny and entertaining anecdotes about burying his father, how Michael finally came around to forgiving his father, and more for what is sure to be a thought-provoking and highly engaging interview. Hi, Michael. A warm, heartfelt welcome to Grief and Rebirth podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And I didn't realize until I heard your introduction that you're in West Orange. I grew up in West Orange.
Oh, you see? No accidents. Well, how many years have you been out of West Orange?
30 plus. A long time. The vast majority of my life at this point.
Well, I guess it gave you some of the seeds of who you are today, right?
Yes, it did. Yes,
and close to the city too.
Yeah.
So now we're going to get to know you a little bit. Okay, let's introduce everybody to Michael and your experiences and how this developed with you, your dad. So could you tell us about your mostly absent father and how your relationship with him evolved from West Orange to Statia and soured before his death?
My father, as you said in the introduction, was a bit of a enigma. He was very charismatic and very engaging and loving, and when he was available, when he was around. But he also was very troubled and didn't know how to fit into the world. And he was really searching most of his life for something that I never understood. He left our family when I was 4-ish, maybe 4 or 5. And we were living in North Coldwell at the time, and moved, and he left and went to the city and got a flat in the East Village with his secretary. and left my mom, who was completely unprepared, ill prepared to raise two kids by herself, and and left us to fend for ourselves. He wasn't entirely absent in my youth. He was, I would go visit him, and we would go to my sister, who was 4 years older than me. She and I would go to the city most weekends, at least for a while, and this is the '70s, and we would take the bus to Port Authority and take the subway downtown by ourselves. Me at 5 or 6 or 7 years old, not thinking anything weird about that. These
Those
days,
days it was a little safer.
I guess so. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe. I mean, I was mugged a couple of times along the way, but
Oh my gosh.
yeah. But he was, so he was very. He wanted to be my playmate. He wanted to be a kid. He thought of himself as a kid, and when I was a teenager, that was great. I loved having this playmate who would get high and tell me about philosophy and take me to cool things in the city as long as they were free. And he would, he was very entertaining, except he had set no boundaries. He didn't have any interest in being a father, being a parent. And as I grew up and as I got into my 20s and 30s, I started recognizing how that lack of boundary really impacted me and really, screwed me up in a lot of ways. And, my mom had her own issues that contributed to me being screwed up as well.
Of
And
course, I can relate.
not insignificantly because of the divorce and what it left her with. And so, I increasingly became frustrated with his inability, unwillingness to get a job. He had a PhD in pharmacology that he was using and earning, great money before he left our family and dropped out, but refused to sort of ever get a straight job again, and was doing odd jobs and living off of his girlfriend, then second wife eventually. And he would just take advantage of everybody around him, including us, including the kids. And while he was caring and had a lot of, he loved to share, interesting insights with us. Most importantly, the reverence for art and for writing that was his, guiding light. Uh, he didn't really have any interest in much more than that. And he would like to tell us things, but didn't have all that much interest in what we had to say. Uh, anyway, and then his life sort of fell apart. His second wife left eventually after she had a baby that she sort of talked him into, and then by that time that my half brother was 3 or 4, they split, and she left and took him to New Jersey. Well, my dad stayed in the city, but my dad became increasingly more and more broke and desperate and struggled, and I tried to find common ground with him, but I held such resentment for the way I was raised that it was really hard for me. And he was never willing to give an inch of forgiveness or acceptance or responsibility for what had happened. And I mean, just to finish the story briefly, around when I was just about 40 and he was 70, he was almost 71. He had been living on this remote Caribbean island, living there because he was on the lam from the law and had to get out of the United States. And the details of that story are in the book, and they're entertaining, if not a little scary. But he died suddenly. He had an infection that what we believe it was something that would have been fully treatable with antibiotics, but he didn't have access to them. This island's very small. They didn't have good medical care. And he died. And so me and my sister, who was then living in Texas, in Austin, I was in Los Angeles, and my half brother, who was then in Westchester, the three of us sort of found each other through email and what do we do? What do we do about this? And I guess we need to go down there. And what does that even mean? And then we find out that he had requested a proper Jewish burial.
Just because it's all about him, and
Yeah, you
that's what we
die how you
want.
live, right? He was, and he was not just non-religious; he was vehemently anti-religious throughout his life. He was passionately critical of anything organized and anything accepted by society, and Judaism fell in that category. And so to hear that he wanted this proper Jewish burial was just anathema to everything we understood about who he was. And it turned out that would be just the beginning. That was just the tip of the iceberg, what we would find out. And anyway, so the three of us went down to this remote island. And when we got there, we found that basically this is an island of about, I think, 3,000, 4,000 people at the time. No tourist industry. Like, this is not a place that people come for vacation. And there was nothing, no resources whatsoever.
I
And
love your whole description of how arduous it was even getting there.
well,
Oh my God.
yeah, it was a journey. It was quite a journey to get there. Four planes, each one getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Um, Yeah, and anyway, so we had to figure it out and basically do the whole funeral by hand. We had to literally build a coffin. Like, we were like, where can we buy a coffin? And they were like, you'd have to order one from another island, and it will take weeks, and then you'll have to ship it over, and it's going to be very expensive. And we were like, how do we do that? And so we wound up building a coffin with help of some people on the island, but building a coffin by hand, digging a hole in the ground by hand, cleaning and preparing the body
For
ourselves.
this guy who's put you through all this stuff,
Yes.
for what? For what? Right?
Yes. And meanwhile, having to be with each other, with the three of us siblings who barely knew each other. I mean, my sister and I were not estranged, but we weren't close. Our brother, we didn't know at all. We had never seen him since he was 3 years old. And
It's
so,
amazing that he came. It really is amazing that he came.
and I mean, in retrospect, what an incredible gift. I mean, that relationship, he and I are now, I mean, we don't live in the same area, but we're very close and loving, and same with my sister. And this experience of going to the island completely reshaped my family. And so it's,
Well,
the
how many
end
people
result
get
was
to
phenomenal.
bond? And how many people get to bond in Statia? Come on. You know what amazed me from listening to from reading your story is how much you have achieved in your life with the screwed up relationship with your father and your mom in certain ways. I mean, you are very self-determined. I mean, it's amazing what you were able to do. Other people would either be crippled in therapy, trying to work it out in therapy the rest of their lives, or like and certainly your father with what we went had to have gone on in his life, he couldn't have had the greatest background of his own from his own parents. But I was amazed by you, Michael, because you had no structure. You just had some philosophy guiding you, and look at what you've achieved in your life.
Well, I appreciate that perspective, and I have accomplished a number of things, although it's been largely lurching from one thing to another and
Well, look at how bright and creative, and look what you were able to do.
Thank you. I'm very fortunate, and I feel like largely my father's irresponsibility spurred in me an over responsibility to find a way to succeed, to make things, to do things, combined with a passion for art and again this reverence for how important art is in our lives. And I've always tried to keep track of that, and a lot of luck, a lot of being in the right place at the right time, really. So.
It's really admirable. There's a lurid and upsetting secret you discovered upon your arrival in Statia that you felt compelled to hide from your siblings. And so instead of picking fights with them, instead you picked fights with them, and and unconsciously you maintain the exact dynamic with your father that you were trying most to overcome. You want to talk to us about that?
So my father, one of the things that the way my relationship with my father worked was I was the one that would keep his secrets. When he got in trouble with the law, when he, I don't know, screwed over a friend of his, when he did anything wrong, he would brag about it to me in this way that I felt, included, and I get to know the secret, and I get to know, especially again, as a, young person in my teens and early 20s, I found I was, lured in by this. It was a great tactic. I don't know how deliberate he was doing that, but he really pulled me in to keep his secrets. And he would tell me an elaborate story and say, by the way, just keep that from your sister. She doesn't need to know about that. And so I had this part of the nature of my relationship with him was I was his secret holder. And for example, the secret of why he wound up on this island was something that only I knew. My siblings didn't know about it. And so when I was going through his computer, desperately looking for a note, a goodbye note, some message to me and my siblings to be like, let me explain my life to you. Let me make sense of why I've been such an asshole for your entire life. And here's the explanation. And I was just like, there's got to be something. At least he could say goodbye. At least he could. I mean, he did know he was dying for a week or so. I mean, I don't know. He was sick and nothing, no notes at all. And while searching for these notes, I come across his pornography collection, which is just a horrible problem with the digital world. I wish that on no one to, discover their parents' pornography. It's really disturbing and weird. And then even worse was I found these stories that he had written, sexual stories about my sister,
Oh my
about
God.
like these fantasies, and they were like adorned with it's like I can't even remember exactly what it was. It was so intense and overwhelming when I experienced it that I literally just immediately just deleted the whole thing. And so like the memory of it is very vague, but like they were like pictures. They were like not pornographic pictures, but like, I don't know, images from the internet of young women, young girls, not like prepubescent young, but like pubescent girls, like in the margins of this writing. And he had written it. And my dad was a novelist. He spent his entire life writing. And so at first I was like, is this part of his novel? Is this, and then I was like, this can't be part of his novel. It was too lurid and just poorly written. It was just terrible. But there was my sister's name and even the name of one of her best friends from high school who I remembered. And I was just terrified and overwhelmed. And again, the first thing I did, I just deleted it. I hid it. I denied it. I just pretended it didn't exist.
Another secret kept.
Yeah, right. And like just followed in the path. Like that was what I was trained to do. Just hide the secret. Don't tell anybody, especially not my siblings. And then over the course of the next few days, I was holding this thing in that I was just, literally nauseated by, and didn't know who I could talk to about it, didn't know how to express it, until finally it slipped out without me wanting it to. And I told my sister about it, and her reaction was basically like, oh yeah, of course. Not that she knew that there were stories, but she certainly knew that he had some sexual fantasy, and he had never molested her. According to her, there was never anything acted on it, but she was aware of his, whatever you call that, interest. Yeah. And she was, she was not pleased about me finding these stories by any means, but she was much less bothered by it because she had been dealing with this her whole life, and it was just continuing something that she knew. And so that was this really very intense experience, or transformative point for me to be able to express that to her.
And what a healing thing to be able to share that with your sister for the first time. The secret was out, and you found out that you could discuss it, and that was another piece of the legacy that you were ending. Yeah. Right? You've got a great anecdote in your book about finding the materials to build your father's coffin and the deeper meaning of encasing him for eternity in those materials. So how about sharing that with us?
So my father, as this literary person, had an incredible library of thousands and thousands of books, mostly decrepit paperbacks, and they were books he read. There was not a pristine library. It was a very well-worn, used library. And from the time I was a kid, I knew his library was sacred, and it lined the walls of his apartment in New York. And when he moved a number of times, he managed to keep this library of books intact. And he put them in storage, and then he had the storage ship them down to Statia after he was there. And he had reconstructed this entire library in his little cabin where he was living. It's just like a little bungalow. But he had these bookshelves made for him to house this ridiculous library of books. And the books were, like I said, they were in terrible shape. To keep them, to transport them, especially after the age of the internet, when you could search and find any detail you want, easily. The physical books were important to him, and he had this bookcase, this massive wall-long bookcase built to hold all the books. And when we were trying to figure out how to build a coffin, when we realized that we couldn't get one, we couldn't buy one anywhere in any sort of timely
Now
way.
his body was being refrigerated stored somewhere.
Yeah, there is a morgue there is a hospital on this little island, and they had a morgue, although calling it a morgue makes you think of what you see on TV shows where there's like a giant room with metal, and this was like literally a tiny, 8 by 8 room with a big refrigerator in it, a morgue refrigerator, which I guess if you're in a municipal world, you can buy that sort of thing. And it's like it held 3 bodies, and that was it. And yeah, he was in there in the morgue. And anyway, so there's a guy who we're recommended to talk to who might be able to help us build the coffin. And it's the guy who built these bookcases for my father. And his name is Reggie, and he is also my dad's pot dealer on the island. So he and my dad have
very important content, very important connection.
they have a loving relationship. I mean, I haven't gotten into this, but one of the weird things about getting to the island was that everybody knew him. Everybody knew him, my father, and everybody loved him. He was adored. He was very charismatic. He was fun. He was entertaining. As long,
he didn't have to take care of any of them. He was just entertain them. That was his thing.
He probably owed most of the money, but they weren't that, seemingly they were okay with that. And so anyway, Reggie was, we asked him to help us build the coffin. He was like, sure, I would be happy, I'd be honored to build the coffin, but I don't have any wood. And we were like, I really, like, how hard is it to get? And so we could go to the other island. We could take the boat over to St. Kitts and maybe get some wood and bring it back. But that was complicated, and we didn't even know if we could pull it off. And all the while, we're trying to keep in this 3-day window. Jewish law says you're supposed to bury the deceased within 3 days. We didn't arrive there until the second day. So we're like trying everything we can to do this really quickly. We're already on the third day at this point when we're talking to him. And so anyway,
and the clock is ticking.
Yeah, the clock is ticking. We're like, how are we going to get through this? So at some point we realize, wait a minute, we have wood. There's a lot of wood, and it's panels that maybe not what you would prefer to use for a coffin, but they would probably work in these bookshelves. And so we take all these books off the shelves and disassemble the bookshelves and bring the wood to Reggie. And he creates a coffin from this. And so we effectively buried him in his bookshelf, which, as someone who revered his books above all, was somehow fitting.
It was very fitting. And when your sister tried to follow Judaic custom for your father's funeral, how did this affect you? With the way you felt that you're going to all this trouble, the 3-day limit and all that you have to do, and you have to wrap him this way, and you have to say these prayers. How did you feel about that?
I was very frustrated and resentful of that. And I was not religious at all. I had sort of followed in my father's perspective that religion is for suckers. It's just a way to, take advantage of people. And I didn't see any value in organized religion. I only saw the negatives. And, keep in mind that this is, over the time that the Catholic Church has been exposed for all this terrible behavior. And I'm not interested in religion. I think it is futile. But my sister had found Judaism as a way of coping with our screwed up childhood. She had found a community.
The structure. She liked the structure.
And she respected it and loved it. And she didn't give me a hard time. She certainly didn't try to proselytize me in any way. But my father asked for it. She understood what needed to be done. But it became this source of obstacle between us, because I was like, we just need to get through this. We just need to do the minimum to get out of here and leave. And, and she was like, well, actually, there are things that we need to do, that you need to follow these rules. And it was very, very challenging. And in retrospect, after all was said and done, and in fact, even really, during the moment of the funeral, I was suddenly, for the first time in my life, thrust upon me was this understanding of the purpose of religion. That in a time, when you are in a time of life where there is just you don't know what to do. You're overwhelmed with the details of somebody's death, of becoming an adult, joining into a marriage where you're this unknown ahead of you. These moments that are so big and bigger than any individual, having a structure to lean on is incredibly comforting. And being connected to this history, this past for Jews, 5, almost 6,000 years of history, like that provides support. It turns out there's a value, and I still have mixed feelings about Judaism in some ways, though my 6-year-old daughter just started Hebrew school. But I really learned through this experience the value of having a community, of a religious community in particular, and especially the rituals for death, which again, during the experience of, I was so frustrated with, but in retrospect, I see tremendous beauty and love and connection between the family. And these rituals are for the family. They're not for the dead. The dead is oblivious. The deceased is dead. They're not thinking
No, they're
about.
on the other side already, and
Yeah.
they're getting a universal view.
Yeah, and but for the family, and anyway, so I found tremendous value in that after the fact.
Yeah, I hear you. I think we could talk about that. I'm very much along the same lines as you. And I also, like you, had a very difficult and mostly absent father. So what would you like to say about the unique grieving process that comes with the death of a difficult and mostly absent parental feeling? How did you feel after you finally, so long, Dad, this is it?
There's two things that come to mind when you say that. One is, I mean, you joked in the pre-interview that, there's a great sense of relief. And I think that there's truth to that. There's a sense of, for me, I think that I had been fighting against him unconsciously, but my whole life. Everything I did, I was aware of how he would judge it or not judge it or approve or whatever. Every decision I made, every thought, everything was about, not, I wouldn't say it was about trying to please him, but I was certainly
His voice was in your head.
absolutely. And to be relieved of that was an incredible gift, was an incredible relief. I mean, in fact, I had been struggling with a screenplay I'd been trying to work as a screenwriter during the years before he died. And after he died, I quit. I quit screenwriting and I started painting, and found such incredible relief and I was like, oh, I've been writing these screenplays for him. I've been trying to write to meet his expectations, not my own. And I did eventually go back to screenwriting, but for that moment, that sense of I don't have to live for him anymore was just an incredible relief. On the other hand, I had thought I was done arguing with him. Like I had thought that I was done, being angry at him. And then suddenly he died. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not done with you. Like I have more to say. I never got relief. I never got the acknowledgement of his part in our screwed up relationship. I never got that acceptance or whatever it is. I never got something that I really had wanted from him that I didn't know. And suddenly I was so aware that I would never get it, that it was no longer.
And you've never resolved that. That still sits with you.
A little bit. I mean, the writing of this book was an effort to sort of resolve that. And I think in a lot of ways I have moved past that, certainly.
Okay. I want to know about the kind of art that you do, because I love art. Are you doing oils, watercolors? What are you doing?
I was doing mostly just acrylic painting, and in fact, as soon as I started getting pretty good, I stopped because it suddenly became too much pressure to be like, I mean, I live in a community of artistic people, and it was like as soon as I was starting to get pretty good, everyone's like, "Oh, you should pursue this," and I was like, "Oh, I need to do it right, and I need to learn," and I started trying to study.
Fun anymore.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, and so I still have done a little bit now and then, but I'm not doing it that much, and I have moved more to writing for creativity.
Yeah, and you're doing a good job with that. I have to say, your memoir is great. So tell us about Anais. No, Anais.
Yeah.
Anais.
Anais,
sister Anais, right before your father's death, and how both your life and your relationship with her transformed after your dad's death.
So my sister was My sister, I've always felt like was unsure of how to fit into the world, similar to my father in some ways. And she was very, very academically minded. She spent many, many years in learning in the academic world. And when that finally ended, she found herself sort of left without a clear path of how to move forward. And despite having all these degrees, she never knew how to get a job. And I was constantly very impatient with her. And in the years leading up to my father's death, she and I were pretty estranged. I mean, like we would talk once or twice a year on birthdays, but that was kind of it. And there was no hostility, but there wasn't enough. There wasn't a lot of warmth.
Right.
And I felt disappointed in her, and I felt like she was very irresponsible, which was the one thing that my father did that I pushed, that I rebelled against. And then we had this experience on the island, and she's very spiritual. She's involved in Judaism, but she's also very involved in shamanism and in herbalism. She's a self-trained herbalist. And she pursued, my father was an avid astrologer, by the way. We haven't really talked about that piece of his personality, but it was a big deal. And her herbalism sort of, to me, mimicked his astrology, which I just found intolerable. So I have a lot of hostility towards her. And she's also very impractical. She's not interested in how you how you accomplish the simple task in front of you. She's interested in the implications spiritually and how it will affect everybody. And in this situation where we're trying to bury my father, I could not bear it. I couldn't deal with her spirituality. That sounds very critical, but it was.
No, it doesn't. I totally relate to what you're saying. It was annoying.
Then the thing is, when it came time, just like I was talking about my reckoning with Judaism, when it came time for the ceremony, and I was suddenly done with all the physical tasks of getting the body into the box and getting the body to the gravesite and getting the hole dug to put the body in, there was nothing left to do. And we're just standing there with nothing left between us and the reality that our father is dead. And she came to light. Like all of her skills were perfectly suited for that moment. And she did a very simple, beautiful service. And she connected me and my brother and her, and in this really beautiful way that forever gave me renewed understanding and appreciation. I still get impatient with her sometimes, but I learned a new appreciation. And since his death, in a lot of ways, she really found herself. And I think in some of the same ways that I had spent so much of my time fighting against him unknowingly, she was doing the same thing in her own way. And without him looking over our shoulders, without him speaking in our minds, both of us, I think, were able to sort of move on with our lives in really good ways. And things aren't perfect, and no life is that simple. But there was a real marked change after.
You're both free in a lot of ways. You're both free in a lot of ways, and free to reframe your relationship as best you can. Now, tell me about Tobias, because I really felt your love for him and your sadness that you didn't connect with him more when he was growing up.
Yeah, so he's 25 years younger than me. I'm sorry, 15 years younger than me. I was 15 when he was born. When I was 18, I went off to college. My dad and his second wife divorced, and she took him away. And I understand in retrospect how, as an 18-year-old, my life got so self-centered and I lost track of him, and he was not in my life. I never had a chance to see him. But, then we reconnect 25 years later, and I'm struck with how much I can't believe I wasn't there for him as he grew up. And I reenacted the same absentness that my father did to me, I did to my kid brother. And I really felt tremendous, sadness, disappointment with myself, and also like the reality of, okay, here's this kid, this 25-year-old guy that I don't know at all, but yet as I say in the book, we shared this most intimate of things. We shared a father, and not just any father, but this, outsized presence. Yeah, that was like in both of our lives. And I think for better and worse, that has made a bond for us that we now carry. And I think that there is a familiarity as we go through good things and bad things, and challenges and triumphs, that we can share together in a way. And I still wish we were closer. He's still in Westchester, and I'm still in California, and so we're not. We only talk. But actually, today is his birthday.
Ah,
And so he is turning
Toby,
39.
you call him Toby?
Yes.
Happy birthday,
Um,
Toby.
yes. 39 today. And he has two young kids, and I have two young kids. And so we went to visit them a couple months ago. And anyway, I have tremendous love and warmth for him. And yet it is sort of tempered with that our relationship will forever be defined by this fucked up guy that was sort of the triangle that connects us. And
Yeah, yeah.
that's challenging.
Yeah, I totally can relate. How did you finally would you say you've forgiven your father? I know that you found freedom, and forgiving comes with acceptance. And what would you say about that? I know it's changed your life in a lot of ways. Now you're married, you have family, you're reframing things, but um, a lot of people
I,
ask about forgiveness,
so I wrote this book. I wrote the memoir while my wife was pregnant with our first kid. Was now 7 years ago. My daughter will be seven in 2 weeks. And it was like in the 3 months before my daughter was coming out, I suddenly felt this overwhelming urge to get this story out and to write it. And I did. And it was the easiest writing I've ever done. It just poured out of me. And I convinced myself in trying to understand why did I feel this urge to do it, that it was an effort to forgive my father, to release myself of his energy and to whatever. And it was true to a degree, but I put the book down. I actually started focusing on a screenplay version of the book, which was much more fictionalized and great fun. And that movie hopefully will someday get made. But I sort of put the book down and forgot about it a little bit. Excuse me. And then during the pandemic, the movie project really fell apart. Whatever momentum I had built up leading up to that fell apart. And I was like, how am I going to keep this story alive? And a friend of mine was like, didn't you write a book of this thing? Maybe if you publish the book, that will rekindle some momentum for the movie. And I was like, oh. And so I went back to the book and I started sending it out and eventually found a publisher. And the editor I worked with at the publisher gave me some really simple notes, not a ton of not a lot of line edits, but a few big, like, what about this? And what about this? And in the rewrite, which is now a year ago, in that rewrite, I found the forgiveness. It was like, part of the experience of writing and rewriting this book is reliving all these memories and reliving this experience, not just of the funeral, but the book is peppered throughout with all these anecdotes, all these stories from my childhood, from relationships, my relationship with my father, and all the specific stories are the ones that always brought me the most solace, like the things that I was so frustrated with.
For those who don't know that word, Cirrus is a heartache.
Agita. That's the Italian version, right? Heartache. And it wasn't until I was editing the book that I had written 7 years before, that I had adapted into a screenplay, that I've been talking about this story for the last decade, it seems like. Suddenly, in this rewrite, I was like, oh, he was in such pain. So much of what he did, so much of his struggle was born of his own discomfort, of his own pain. And yes, he was self-centered. And yes, he was, took advantage of people, including me and my siblings. And it's unconscionable to take advantage of your children. And he had this awful sexual predilection for my sister, which is disgusting and really hard to accept. And I don't feel like I accept that as much as sort of just compartmentalize it. But I suddenly found I was brought attention to the amount of pain he lived in and the way he spent his whole life running from his father, from his struggles, from
and exercising himself from that pain too.
And and a lot of it is also about Judaism. I mean, he grew up. He was born in 1937. He was a young child during the Holocaust, aware of it but unsure of his connection to it. and he wasn't denying his Judaism, but he was pushing it away, and in the end found it and said, wait, maybe I need to embrace that. All of this, I was really just filled with this sense of appreciation for where it came from. Do I wish he had been a different father? Yes, but I am not angry at him in the way I think I was for so much of my life.
Yeah, you came to some
So
peace with it.
yeah, is that forgiveness? I think so. I hope so.
No, I can totally understand that, because when I look back and I think about my own father's life, and then what led to this person that led to this person, you start to
Yeah.
understand more. You have an idea. When I was reading about you, you say that you believe that we really choose our moods. And when we're in a sour mood, we're the ones who suffer most. That fascinated me. And then in spiritual terms, they talk about, you can choose your thoughts, and your thoughts affect your reality and all. I'd like to hear the Michael Wall version of that.
It's not fully fleshed out. I think at the time that I was expressing that, I was watching my 6-year-old, ruin everybody's day because she was in a bad mood. And then I caught her playing by herself for a moment, and completely fine. And then, like, she saw that I was watching, and all of a sudden she got mad, and she had to remember she was in a bad mood. And, the beautiful thing about children is how transparent they are sometimes. And how one can see that they are reflecting what we all do. And I realize how much I can do that same thing, where I decide I'm in an upset mood. I decide to stay mad at the driver who cut me off, or the whatever injustice there may be at the moment. And there's sadly no shortage of injustices. But it's an effort. It's a choice. We make a choice to hold that energy, and when we do, nobody else knows or cares. I mean, it's yourself. You're the one who is suffering. You're the one who's holding your energy in, who's giving yourself a neck ache, or not sleeping at night, which, I suffer too much. Like it's all self-inflicted. And so much of finding relief is choosing to find relief. There's a billboard, or like a piece of graffiti actually somewhere near my house, that says, we're all about as happy as we decide to be, or something. I think something like that.
That's actually pretty wise.
Yeah, I find that particularly, and some days I'm like, why can't I choose to be happier? But it's habits.
At least you're becoming conscious, Michael. They would say in my world, you're becoming conscious and you're becoming aware. Most people who are in lousy moods and beating everybody up with their lousy mood, they're not aware that they even have a choice.
Yeah.
That it could be different, right? They could heal. Then just get on the website, get on Grief and Rebirth. There are tons of ways you can heal that stuff. And loads of people eager to help you. Why do you feel it's important for healing and relief to be an inside job instead of being sourced from the outside?
Well, I don't know if I'd say it's important as much as I think it's just the only option. I don't think it works from the outside. I think there is such a giant industry of self-help books and things. And like, again, I've got these young kids, my wife and I, we buy every parenting book we come across. We're constantly like, oh, there's the answer. If only I buy that book, and of course we barely read them. We just buy them and stick them on the shelf and think, now I'll understand this struggle. All of growth happens from the inside, and, and to expect any external force. Well, here's what I would say. The only external forces I think that create change are so big and so overwhelming that they are generally awful. The death of a spouse, being caught up in a hurricane, being stuck in some terrible war or some environment, or being abused. The horrible situations can change us from the outside, but that's not the way anybody would prefer to do it, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And this I love. Please explain how focusing on gratitude and appreciation and avoiding social media leads to lasting healing and joy.
I
work. Here you are in social media plugging your book, and here I am.
I actually just a quick anecdote about social media. I have avoided social media for many, many years. I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago realized that every time I was using social media, it was because I was either depressed or it would make me depressed. Like it was just, there was no good coming from it. And I really shut it out of my life. And then I wrote this book, and my publisher was like, you need to publicize the book, and social media is the world. Like, you can't avoid it. And so I hired this publicist, and the publicist had a social media person, and they've been running my social media accounts for the last 5 months. And thank God they're stopping at the end of this month. It's over now that the book is out. But I wrote a blog about my feelings about social media, which is on my Medium page, which I expresses my the I don't know, hypocrisy is the wrong word, but the contradiction of, we have to communicate with other people, but communicating with other people, I think, especially in the ways that social media manifests, are very, very destructive.
Yeah, it can be very negative. And so instead of focusing on social media, you're focusing on gratitude and appreciation these days, right?
I mean, it's just the only choice. Again, like, it's not some like great choice. And like, I just saw this Amy Schumer skit about gratitude, where these people are basically raging at each other and saying like, I'm so grateful. And like, it's a struggle every day to remember to be grateful, but I have incredible blessings. I have a family that's healthy and alive and together. I have a beautiful home. I have, resources to do the things I want to do. And every day, when I focus and when I appreciate those things, when I think about how blessed I am, how fortunate I am, I'm able to go through the day with happiness and joy. Every time I catch myself being jealous or frustrated or wanting something else that I don't have, or thinking somebody else has something that I should have, all of that, it's just, again, it's the same thing. Like, that's when I find myself in a bad mood. And I have the choice. I have the choice to decide, focus on that, or stop and look around and say, oh, but look, whatever tiny little thing that you can be appreciative of will set you on the path towards a better mood.
That's so true. I agree. Michael, in Herschel's Wake is not only an insightful and delightful read. I mean, I loved it. It is also an honest and poignant portrayal of complicated relationships, complicated feelings, and forgiveness. Thank you from my heart for this engaging, thought-provoking, and uplifting interview on Grief and Rebirth podcast. And here's a loving reminder, everyone, that you can see the show notes and all Grief and Rebirth podcast episodes on ireneweinberg.com. And make sure to follow us and like us on that social media at Irene S. Weinberg on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And if you're watching here on YouTube, be sure to click subscribe below so you'll never miss an episode. As I like to say, to be continued. Many blessings.
Thank you.
Bye for now. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. And to be continued.